Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about India's relations with Maldives. Maldives is a tiny island nation with actually many islands. It's an archipelago, but it's a very tiny country in terms of population, about 560,000 people only, but probably also the richest country in the neighborhood in the terms of per capita income. Its per capita income is about 20,000. It is a 99% Muslim country, but it is currently going through very serious economic crisis. One of the problems is that it has a large debt, and its dollar reserves have shrunk to less than $500 million, about 450 at the moment, and apparently it has dollars that are left. The amount of dollars it has now, it can only last for a month and a half. So they will have to both pay for the debt servicing as well as for imports with that meager amount of dollars that they have. It's a country that's very beautiful, and therefore its major source, or perhaps the only source of income, is international tourism, and the biggest the country from where most people used to come until recently was India and also China. And there have been some disputes, and we will talk about it, but it is quite apparent that if you look at what is going on in the region, India's neighborhood for first foreign policy is not as successful as people might think. India is not able to essentially assert itself. India likes to think of itself as a hegemon in the region. One of the biggest regional organizations, SAARC, has been rendered meaningless because India is unable to basically restore and have positive relations with its neighbor, with two of its neighbors, that is China and Pakistan. And so there are other alternatives that India is trying to create by which it can become the leader of South Asia, but it's South Asia minus Pakistan and China. So basically, India hoped to essentially dominate and to some extent even bully small countries like Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh. And even with Myanmar, India has struggled to have very good relations. So before we dive into the relations between Maldives and India, please subscribe to Khanversations if you have not already done so. Like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your social political network. So this is what has happened. There was a kind of a power transfer in the last elections in Maldives, and Mohammed Muizzu became the prime minister, the president of Maldives. He won the elections on a India out campaign. He wanted India out, especially India's military presence, which was limited to about 75 soldiers who were there to help fly helicopters, which India had gifted to Maldives. But nevertheless, there was a lot of politicization of India's role there. There was violence when India tried to celebrate a yoga day, and so there was some violence from some Muslims who were very angry about it. And then subsequently, he won a huge election, and not only that, but his party then subsequently won the parliamentary elections too. So at the moment, you could fairly argue that the existing government of Maldives was not exactly pro-India or pro-Modi. And then Mohammed Muizzu broke the protocol. All new presidents of Maldives would make sure that their first international visit was to India. Remember, Sheikh Hasina came to India twice in 2 weeks after she was elected as prime minister for the fourth time in Bangladesh. So this was the normal protocol even for the leaders of Maldives, but this time Muizzu chose to go to China. He also went to Turkey before he came to India. So it was clearly a snub, and he has come very close to China. He was already seen as a very pro-China minister before he became the leader of the country. And not only that, China has increased the amount of tourists who are coming So the dispute between India and Maldives, which started during that election season, was also because Prime Minister Modi went and uh, took a selfie or a photograph in Lakshadweep Islands, which are very close to Maldives. And the message that was at least received by Maldivians was that India was trying to essentially create an alternative tourist spot, which was Indian set of islands to basically compete with Maldives, so that Indian tourists would all go to Lakshadweep, not go to Maldives. It would basically destroy Maldives' economy and tourism because they depended so heavily on Indian tourists. So that was the part which really angered some of the parliamentarians in Maldives. And then, of course, Muizzu got elected and he snubbed India. And then he became very close to China, to so much so that in February, Chinese ships, under the pretext of doing some kind of survey, were actually there collecting intelligence against India. So Muizzu basically became much more closer to India in the past few months. But as the economy got worse and worse, and a kind of India boycott, an informal boycott by Indians, driven more by social media, essentially reduced the amount of tourists who were going to India. Maldives depends a lot on India, not just on tourism for its revenues, but most of the Maldivians for healthcare go to India. And to such an extent that even drinking water comes from India. So it's kind of difficult for a Maldivian president to remain at odds with India. India is a gigantic country right next to it. There are neighborhoods in cities in India which are bigger than Maldives when it comes to population. So for Maldives to take this position was kind of weird at the moment. But as it became apparent that while India was boycotting Maldives was getting closer and closer to China and getting entangled in China's Belt and Road Initiative. It is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. China is building huge projects there. Maldives has borrowed $1.37 billion from China. And as a result of that, Maldives is much closer to China now, both, shall we say, in strategic sense as well as an economic sense. But it's trying to balance India. And when the Indians saw that, that Maldives was becoming more and more of a client of China, they kind of recognized that being hostile towards Maldives was counterproductive, because the more India put pressure on Maldives, the closer it would get to China, and then it would just become a Chinese colony. And not only that, the entire neighborhood in India, in South Asia, is becoming anti-India. The new president of Sri Lanka is a Marxist with ideological leanings very close to China, and so there's considerable worry that Sri Lanka's relations, which have until now been more or less very good with India, could go worse. And one of the reasons why India found an opening to improve its relations with Sri Lanka is because of the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, and India was able to help them. The Chinese did not help the Sri Lankans because the previous president was seen as much closer to the US and was not having good relations. So now, with the Marxist or former Marxist as president of Sri Lanka, it's quite possible that Sri Lanka-China relations will once again get better, which is kind of a zero-sum game with India. And then, of course, what happened in Bangladesh with India's partner and ally in the region, Sheikh Hasina, being expelled and removed, and such anti-India anger, it just seems to be clear that India's neighborhood policy is not working at all. And so under pressure that its neighborhood policy is not working, and also under pressure that Maldives could become a Chinese colony, India has basically reached out, and Muizzu was recently in India, and a lot of money is being, financial assistance is coming from India for Maldives. For example, they are rolling over $100 million. There is a $400 million currency swap, which means Maldivians can import things using their own currency, which means they don't have to pay out in dollars. So if most of the stuff that goes to Maldives, from vegetables to water, comes from India. So, but if they're going to import all of that, in either Indian rupees or whatever Maldivian currency is, then they don't lose the few dollars that they have, and that can be used to pay off loans that they have to other places. So, and there's a possibility there will be another $375 million currency swap. Muizzu was treated like a state guest, obviously, red carpet treatment, and India got nothing in return, basically. Prime Minister Modi was invited to inaugurate something in Maldives virtually. And Prime Minister Modi has promised to visit Maldives in the near future. Other than that, India is not getting anything from the deal, but Maldives probably will find that the economy could be stabilized, especially with the currency swap, that it can import everything that it needs to import in non-dollar currency. So the shortage of dollars that is essentially one of the key triggers of economic failures in most developing countries, which then forces them to go to IMF, and then IMF comes and restructures their economies, and Maldives can potentially escape that. By looking at all of this, I think it appears that Muizzu may have played Modi. He won an election on an anti-India campaign very clearly, recognizing that Maldives was heavily dependent on India for many things. Most neighbors are, especially small neighbors, tend to depend heavily on big neighbors. Canada is highly dependent on the United States. Canadian economy wouldn't survive if there was hostile relations between Canada and the United States. And similarly, Maldives is a tiny country, heavily dependent on India, yet Muizzu won the election, exploiting the anti-America sentiment in the population at that time. And then he played India by getting closer to China, getting benefits from China, and also getting benefits from India. The Indian Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, likes to talk a lot about multi-alignment, and we are multi-aligned. We want to get the best of technology from the West, and we also want to get the best from Russia. We are neither in the Russian or Chinese camp, and we are not in the Western camp. We want to benefit from both, and this is our strategic autonomy. Well, apparently the same game is now being played by Maldives, and so he's getting the best of whatever he wanted from China, a 1.37 billion loan, more tourists from China, some strategic partnership, and from India, it's getting $100 million, and then $400 million in currency swap, red carpet treatment, extended meeting with Prime Minister Modi. I mean, this is amazing what Maldives is getting. Manipur doesn't get. People from Manipur are suffering for the last year and a half and are dying in a civil war. They don't get the kind of attention from the prime minister that Muizzu has managed. So in that sense, I think Muizzu has to some extent played Modi and basically has also to some extent played China and has trying to save his country's economy. The key is good governance. What he's doing is just managing an economic crisis. But the key for developing countries is not to get into that position where you have to borrow money from others. And if there is an up and down in the economic cycles, such as a pandemic, which completely killed tourism for at least 2 years, can completely derail your economic development and progress. So good governance is fundamentally important. And I think both rich and poor countries should focus more on good governance so that if there is crisis, they have resilience and they can deal with it rather than having to run helter-skelter for help. So anyway, I hope you found this conversation interesting and thought-provoking. So please subscribe to Khanversation, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your friends and your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.